Imagine this. You're walking down a quiet city street at dusk. The golden light scatters across the buildings. It should be peaceful. You just got off work. You're headed home. Nothing's wrong. And yet, your chest is tight. Your mind keeps looping over things you said. The way that one coworker looked at you. The email you haven't replied to. The unread message from someone you used to love. Your phone buzzes. You don't check it. You don't want to. You know it's probably trivial. But deep inside, something coils, something you can't name. A tension, a dissonance. You feel like you're being chased by something that isn't there. And here's the strange part. No one sees it. From the outside, you look fine. Maybe even successful. Maybe even happy. But inside, you're drowning in invisible weight. And when you try to explain it, when you try to describe this persistent undercurrent of unease, you're handed a diagnosis. Generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety, panic disorder, labels, pills, breathing exercises. You're told your mind is lying to you. But is it? What if it's not a malfunction? What if anxiety isn't the alarm going off for no reason? What if it's the only thing still telling the truth? What if your mind isn't broken, but overly accurate? What if your body isn't betraying you, but trying to protect you from something you haven't yet dared to name? Here's the paradox. We live in a society that worships comfort, but generates chronic stress. That promises freedom while surveilling our thoughts, preferences, and desires. That offers more options than ever, yet leaves you paralyzed by indecision. That teaches you to be independent, but sells you dependency in the form of apps, medications, subscriptions, distractions. You're told you're safe, but then you're bombarded with headlines, ads, curated perfection, algorithmic manipulation, cultural collapse, ecological dread, job insecurity, and an unshakable sense that you're falling behind. Even when you're doing everything right, is it really you that's irrational? Or is anxiety a sane response to an insane world? This is the question we rarely ask. Not because it's invalid, but because it's terrifying. Because if anxiety is rational, then we can't simply suppress it. We have to listen. We have to consider the possibility that the system, the world we built, the lives we're told to live, might be the real source of the dissonance. Imagine being born into a society that tells you to follow your dreams, but then designs every institution to mold you into a worker, a consumer, a compliant node in a vast machine you barely understand. Imagine being told that life is about connection, while most of your relationships are filtered through glass, governed by algorithms, dependent on performance and appearance. Imagine being told you're free, while everything you do is tracked, monetized, and analyzed to predict and influence your next move. Then ask yourself, is anxiety a malfunction or a message? You wake up each day and move through your routine, coffee, commute, screens, deadlines, performance. You're told to be productive, polite, punctual. But where in that routine is your spirit? Your rage? Your wonder? Your grief? Where is your wildness? Anxiety might not be your enemy. It might be your soul, screaming through the cracks in the structure, not to destroy you, but to save you. But this realization leads to an even deeper, more unsettling question. If anxiety is rational, what does that say about the world we've made rationality serve? Is the problem internal, or is it systemic? Is the dissonance in your head, or in your culture? Is your pain personal or collective? And if you dare to see the full scope of the illusion, would it set you free or break you? Carl Jung once wrote, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you." But what if the world is insane and still very good at telling stories that sound like truth? What if anxiety is the last shred of inner rebellion, your body's resistance to a life too small for your soul? And what if silencing that anxiety is like turning off the fire alarm while the house is still burning? You've been taught to run from anxiety, to tame it, to manage it. But what if, just what if, you turned toward it? What if you sat with it long enough to hear what it's trying to say? What might it reveal? A deeper truth? A forgotten wound? A buried desire? A suppressed scream? A mirror held up to the world that tells you you're the problem, when in fact, you might be the one still seeing clearly? And if that's true, then the real question isn't, how do I get rid of anxiety? It's, what is this anxiety trying to protect me from? And why is no one else noticing it? That's where we begin. not with answers, but with the courage to ask a question that no one dares to ask in a world obsessed with pretending everything's fine. What if anxiety is the most sane part of you in an insane world? You weren't born anxious. You were born screaming, yes, into a world of noise and light and strange hands. But not anxious. You were born into a body that knew what it needed, that cried when hungry, that reached when lonely, that curled toward warmth and screamed at cold. Your instincts were precise. Your emotions were clean. You had no reason to doubt yourself. But slowly, systematically, you were trained to. You were taught to be good, to sit still, to speak when spoken to smile even when scared, to suppress discomfort so others wouldn't feel awkward, to achieve, not because it brought meaning, but because it brought approval. And at every turn, you were rewarded not for being whole, but for being acceptable. This is where it begins. This is where anxiety first learns to whisper, not as pathology, but as a reaction to the silent death of authenticity. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we develop to meet the demands of society. It is not inherently bad. We all need roles, functions, faces to wear in public. But the danger lies in mistaking the mask for the self, in identifying so completely with our conditioned performance that we no longer know who is behind it. And here's the price. The more you suppress the true self to maintain the persona, the more tension you generate between who you are and who you're pretending to be. That tension doesn't just disappear. It sinks into the body. It tightens the jaw. It shortens a breath. It keeps you awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering why your life feels like it belongs to someone else. This is not disorder. This is the cost of adaptation. Nietzsche understood this well. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he speaks of the last man, a creature who avoids all pain, seeks comfort above truth, and loses his depth in the process. A man who has stopped asking why, who no longer creates questions or rebels, but consumes, complies, and stays busy. This last man is not anxious because of some brain chemistry gone awry. He is anxious because something deep inside him knows. He has betrayed himself. That's what anxiety really is, at its root, a betrayal signal, an inner rupture, a warning bell that somewhere along the way, you abandon most sacred parts of yourself, your wonder, your rage, your sadness, your awe, and replace them with socially sanctioned scripts. Be nice. Stay productive. Don't make waves. Smile more. Fit in. And here's where betrayal becomes systemic. Modern culture is built on the denial of the self. It markets happiness, but conditions you to suppress the very emotions that would lead you there. It sells freedom, but punishes any behavior that isn't useful to profit. It dangles individuality as bait, while demanding conformity in all but the most superficial ways. Your clothes, your tastes, your status symbols. Arthur Schopenhauer described the human condition as driven by an insatiable will, a blind, restless striving that can never be fulfilled. He saw suffering not as an anomaly, but as the very essence of life in a world obsessed with becoming rather than being. From this lens, anxiety isn't just rational, it's inevitable. It is the emotional signature of a consciousness trapped in a system that exploits desire while denying meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre would go even further. In his existentialism, anxiety, anguish as he called it, is a fundamental experience of freedom. The moment you realize you are responsible for your own choices, that no external structure can guarantee meaning, that God is absent and society is hollow, you are plunged into dread. But that dread is not a flaw. It is the gateway to authenticity. In being and nothingness, Sartre writes, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. It is both liberation and burden. And in that burden, anxiety arises, not because you're defective, but because the weight of freedom, the absurdity of existence, and the collapse of illusion must be felt in the body. It must be processed. It must be metabolized. It cannot be avoided without consequence. Now look around. The average person spends over 7 hours a day staring into screens. Most of their communication is digital. Their attention is sold to the highest bidder. Their emotions are medicated, their food industrialized, their days scheduled down to the minute. They are flooded with more information in 1 week than their ancestors encountered in a lifetime. And yet, they're lonelier than ever. You think anxiety is irrational? Or is it the only logical outcome of living in a world where your body and soul are in a constant state of suppression, overstimulation, and unresolved grief? Gabor Maté, renowned physician and trauma expert, speaks to this rupture. He argues that anxiety and addiction are not illnesses to be eradicated, but messages to be deciphered. The question is not why the addiction, he says, but why the pain? This insight reframes everything. What if your anxiety isn't the problem, but the symptom? What if it's not a sign of weakness, but evidence that you haven't fully succumbed, that some part of you is still trying to wake up? In that case, anxiety is not a disorder. It is intelligence. It is memory. It is your nervous system remembering what your ego worked so hard to forget, that this life, as currently lived, is unsustainable. And this is where things get dangerous, because once you realize that, you can never fully go back. You can't unsee the machine. You can't unfeel the ache. You can't keep pretending that this structure, this culture, is normal just because it's common. You may still participate. You may still show up to work, pay your bills, go through the motions. But something deep inside you has shifted. You now carry the seed of rebellion, a quiet rebellion, an inner resistance, not against life, but against a version of life you were told was the only one available. And that seed, if nurtured, will grow into something far more potent than comfort. It will grow into clarity. But clarity has a price, and that price is pain, which brings us to the next phase in this unraveling. What happens when we ignore that pain, when we silence the messenger, but not the message? When you're ready, we'll go deeper, into the unseen consequences of a culture that fears discomfort more than it fears delusion. You silenced it. You went to therapy, took the meds, followed the breathing app. You practiced mindfulness, adjusted your posture, cut back on caffeine. You decluttered your apartment. You started journaling. You told yourself you were healing. But beneath the polished calm, beneath the affirmations and habit trackers and curated routines, something remains unsettled. You still feel it at night when the distractions were thin. You still feel it when you close your laptop and stare into the black void of the screen. You still feel it when you lie in bed, your body exhausted but your mind wide awake, spiraling into loops you can't interrupt. Because the truth is, you never cured the anxiety. You just buried the alarm deeper into your nervous system. And now, because it has no language left, it speaks through your body, a subtle tightness in your throat, random muscle tension, that strange nausea when you're supposed to feel happy, panic attacks out of nowhere, the unexplainable fatigue that no amount of sleep resolves, the numbness that makes even your joy feel artificial. This is the cost of suppression. This is the invisible wreckage of ignoring the soul's warning. Anxiety, once silenced, doesn't vanish. It metastasizes. It becomes mood disorders, autoimmune conditions, chronic fatigue, digestive collapse. It calcifies into habits, overworking, overthinking, compulsive control. It hardens into identities. I'm just an anxious person. That's who I am. But it's not who you are. It's what you become in order to survive a world that refuses to acknowledge the damage it inflicts on the human psyche. Psychologist Rollo may call it anxiety the dizziness of freedom. But in a society that prioritizes efficiency over depth, speed over meaning, distraction over presence, there's no space for that dizziness to be explored. So it festers in the shadows, redirected into socially acceptable dysfunction. Think of this. A child growing up in an emotionally cold household learns to suppress their needs to maintain parental approval. That suppression becomes chronic tension. The body adapts to become acceptable at the cost of authenticity. Fast forward 20 years. That child is now an adult who can't say no, who fears disapproval, who overcommits and self-erases and calls it being nice. The world praises them for their selflessness. No one sees the internal war. No one hears the panic behind the smile, and the system rewards this self-betrayal. Welcome to the hidden economy of anxiety. Our entire culture runs on it. Consumerism thrives on low self-worth. You must feel inadequate for the ad to work. You must doubt your appearance for the product to seem necessary. You must fear missing out for the lifestyle to become desirable. Productivity culture feeds on fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being replaced. Fear of falling behind. Social media monetizes your nervous system. Every notification is a dopamine hit. Every scroll feeds the illusion of connection while deepening your isolation. Every curated post reinforces a belief that everyone else is thriving while you're struggling to breathe. And you call this normal? This is a machine, a brilliantly engineered feedback loop that turns your attention into profit, your emotions into metrics, your humanity into data. And here's the most insidious part. You're blamed for reacting poorly to it. You're told to toughen up, to be more resilient, to choose happiness, to biohack your emotions, to optimize your inner world so you can function better in a system that made you sick. This is psychological gaslighting on a civilizational scale. You are pathologized for responding accurately to cultural pathology. You are made to feel broken for seeing the cracks. This isn't new. In Brave New World, Aldous Huxley warned a society where pleasure is weaponized, where people are controlled not by pain but by overstimulation, where dissent is quelled not through force, but through entertainment. And that's exactly what we built. A world where anxiety is medicated, not understood. Where unease is dismissed, not explored. Where deep emotional truth is replaced with quick fixes, TikToks, productivity hacks. And what happens to a human being in that world? They fracture. They become dissociated. Split between the image they perform and the truth they feel. Split between the noise outside and the scream within. Split between the mask and the mirror. This fracture shows up everywhere. In the rising rates of depression, in the epidemic of burnout, in the quiet despair of people who seem to have it all, but feel nothing inside. You're told to manage your anxiety, but no one tells you to question it, to ask, what is this anxiety trying to protect me from? What boundary did I violate to earn its wrath? What truth did I ignore to maintain approval? What part of myself did I exile just to be accepted? These questions are dangerous because they threaten the very systems that depend on your compliance. They threaten the identity you've built to survive. They threaten the relationships built on your silence. They threaten the institutions that profit from your disconnection. But if you don't ask them, if you keep anesthetizing your inner voice, you end up becoming someone you don't recognize. A hollowed-out version of yourself. Functioning, but not feeling. Appearing calm, but slowly eroding from the inside. And when that erosion reaches a tipping point, when the dissonance becomes too much to ignore, that's when something breaks. That's when anxiety erupts. Not as a malfunction, but as a last attempt at truth. A cry from the deepest part of you. This isn't working. That's the hidden consequence. Not just personal suffering, but spiritual erosion. Not just stress, but the quiet death of your inner compass. And the longer you ignore it, the more numb you become. Until one day, you're no longer anxious. You're just flat. You don't care anymore. You go through the motions. You pretend, you perform, you scroll, you sleep, you survive. But you don't live. Because living requires tension. It requires feeling. It requires facing the thing you've been running from. That your anxiety might be the only honest thing left in your life. Which leads us to the edge. To the precipice of transformation. To the one question you've been circling since the beginning. If anxiety is not the enemy, then who are you without your fear of it? If you were to stop suppressing it, if you were to stop fixing it, if you were to finally listen, fully, radically, without flinching, what might it teach you? That's what comes next. The rebellion, the reckoning, the radical act of turning toward the pain, not to be consumed by it, but to be changed by it. It doesn't begin with a grand declaration. It begins in silence. It begins the moment you stop running, not away from anxiety, but toward it, not with the intention to fix it, but to understand it, to face it like a messenger, not a monster, to regard it as a signal, not a sentence. This is rebellion in its purest form, not the storming of institutions, but the quiet refusal to abandon your own reality. In a culture that profits off your doubt, the most radical act is to believe in your own experience. But to do that, to truly see, you must unlearn almost everything you were taught. Start here. You are not broken. You are responding to a world that is. And now, for the first time, you have a choice. Not the fake choice between different distractions or optimized productivity methods, but the real choice to return to yourself. This isn't easy. In fact, it might be the hardest thing you'll ever do, because self-return means confronting all the pain you suppressed, all the voices you muted, all the betrayals you tolerated for the sake of survival. But this is the only door, the only path through. The question is no longer, how do I stop being anxious? The question is, who do I become when I stop betraying myself? To answer that, you must begin the process of disobedience, not against laws or norms, but against the internalized voices that keep you small, silent, compliant. Refuse to apologize for your discomfort. That tension in your chest, that quickened heartbeat, that wave of dread, it's not weakness. It's signal. It's your nervous system telling you the situation you're in, or the persona you've adopted, is not aligned with your truth. When you feel it, don't numb it. Don't intellectualize it. Sit with it. Ask it what it wants. Anxiety often arises not from what is happening, but from what you're not allowing yourself to feel about what is happening. That's why the first act of rebellion is emotional honesty. Feel everything. Let the grief rise. Let the anger surface. Let the sadness speak. Emotions are not interruptions to healing. They are healing. They are the very threads that stitch you back together. As Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness is your anxiety. It is a repressed truth, the unprocessed grief, the authentic self begging to be let out of its cage. And here's the paradox. The more you face it, the more it transforms. What once felt like a threat becomes a guide. What once paralyzed you begins to move you, because in the confrontation there is power. You begin to separate from the noise. You stop believing every thought your mind throws at you. You start to hear your intuition again, quiet at first but persistent. This is the slow reclamation of sovereignty, and with it comes clarity. You don't have to be at war with yourself. You were trained to believe that comfort was a goal. But comfort is a byproduct, not a purpose. The purpose is integrity. To live in alignment with what your soul knows to be true, no matter how inconvenient that truth may be. That's the next act of rebellion. Alignment over approval. Say no when you mean no. Disappoint people if that means not disappointing yourself. Walk away from systems, jobs, relationships that require you to abandon your truth, even if it terrifies you. Especially if it terrifies you, because the fear isn't a stop sign. It's a threshold. Cross it, and you discover what fear is protecting. Often, it's something sacred. Your voice, your art, your insight, your unique way of being in the world. This is where self-growth stops being cute and becomes dangerous, because now you are no longer controllable. You are no longer seduced by shallow metrics of success. You are no longer willing to live as a fragment. And from that place, wholeness, you can finally access something society never taught you to value. Stillness, not the deadness of suppression, but the electric silence of presence. The kind that allows anxiety to rise, swell, pass, without hijacking your identity. You begin to live like a tuning fork, sensitive to truth, resonant with clarity. You feel more, but you fear less. Because your emotions no longer own you. They inform you. They guide you. This is the third act of rebellion. Agency over control. Agency means you no longer live reactively. You no longer need life to be predictable to feel safe. You stop trying to manipulate every outcome. Instead, you cultivate the capacity to meet life as it is, to feel everything without collapsing, to endure uncertainty without losing your center. This is not avoidance. This is mastery. And mastery begins with understanding that anxiety is not a force to be eradicated, but a messenger to be honored. So, what do practically? You build rituals that connect you to reality, walking, breathing, stillness, nature, not for productivity, but for presence. You stop outsourcing your sanity to strangers on screens. You curate your environment. Cut off what numbs you. Feed what awakens you. You prioritize depth over performance, real conversation, real solitude, real connection. You engage with ideas that stretch you, not to impress, but to expand. You express yourself through art, movement, voice, not to be seen, but to be felt. Most importantly, you accept that this path is not linear. Some days, the anxiety will return, like an old friend or maybe a ghost. It will test you. It will ask, "Are you still listening?" And your answer must not be resistance. Your answer must be, "Yes, speak." Because the moment you listen, truly listen, you transmute it. You turn fear into insight. You turn discomfort into growth. You turn panic into power. And slowly, imperceptibly, the war inside you ends. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you stopped waiting for the culture to save you. Because you realized rebellion is not a fight. It is a return to yourself. And in that return, you become the one thing society cannot digest. A human being who feels everything and fears nothing. That's the revolution. And it begins now. There comes a moment when the noise dies down, not because the world has gotten quieter, but because you have stopped listening to its false urgency. It feels strange at first. A space opens in you, empty, echoing, unfamiliar. Not numbness, not distraction, but awareness. Clean, clear, and unrelenting. And in that space, something ancient stirs. Not your thoughts, not your trauma. Something beneath all that. The self that has always been watching, waiting. This is the moment people call awakening. But it doesn't feel like light. It feels like death. The death of who you thought you were. The death of the story you clung to. The death of the idea that if you just tried harder, fixed yourself more completely, everything would be okay. You see through it all. The self-help industry built on perpetual inadequacy. The culture of hustle fueled by quiet desperation. The endless algorithms designed to keep you chasing dopamine while draining your spirit. And in that clarity, you finally face the truth. Anxiety was never your enemy. It was your most faithful companion. It was the part of you that refused to settle, that would not go quietly into a life too small for your soul, that screamed when you stayed silent, that tightened your chest when you agreed to things that broke your boundaries, that kept you up at night, not to torment you, but to wake you up. You thought it was a flaw. It was your compass. It wasn't trying to destroy your peace. It was trying to restore your truth. But you couldn't see that until you were ready to stop fixing it and start feeling it. Now you see the full map, not just of your own psychology, but of human nature itself. You see that what we call anxiety is often the byproduct of a fundamental mismatch, a wild, sensitive, truth-seeking being trying to function inside a dead, mechanical, performative system. You see that the very qualities that make you anxious, your sensitivity, your depth, your refusal to pretend, are not weaknesses. They are intelligences. They are resistance strategies against a world that numbs and narrows consciousness to fit its own agendas. You were told to manage these traits, to tone them down, to conform. But now you know they are sacred. And here's the deepest paradox of all. The moment you stop fighting your anxiety, it stops being anxiety. It becomes clarity. It becomes intuition. It becomes a signal that guides you toward alignment rather than alarm. Because now, you're no longer interpreting your body's signals through the lens of fear. You're listening with reverence. You don't ask, "How do I fix this?" You ask, "What truth is this trying to reveal?" And the answers come, not in dramatic revelations, but in quiet knowings. This relationship is hurting me. This job is killing my creativity. This lifestyle isn't mine. This version of success feels like a cage. This story about who I need to be is not true. I miss myself. These are not breakdowns. These are truth activations. And they change you. You start to choose differently. Not to avoid anxiety, but to honor it. You surround yourself with people who make your nervous system exhale. You engage in work that enlivens, not depletes. You let go of the masks that no longer fit. You stop proving. You start expressing. You stop pleasing. You start living. And the world doesn't know what to do with this version of you. You're calm, not because you're unaffected, but because you're in contact with reality. You're grounded, not because life is easy, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. Your clarity becomes unnerving. Your peace becomes contagious. This is what liberation feels like. Not perfection, not constant bliss, but alignment. And from that alignment comes the most profound realization of all. You were never meant to be normal. You were meant to be real, to feel everything, to sense a collective grief that most people suppress, to carry the wisdom that no one else wants to hear, to birth new ways of being simply by refusing to die inside systems that no longer make sense. And anxiety was a guardian of that purpose. It refused to let you go numb. It refused to let you forget. It kept dragging you back to yourself again and again until you listened. And now that you have, it quiets, not because it's gone, but because its job is done. It doesn't need to scream anymore. You're awake. You know what you are, not a diagnosis, not a defect, but a mirror reflecting everything the world wants to ignore. A truth teller, a frequency keeper, a being of depth in a culture of surfaces. And now the choice is yours. Do you fall back asleep into old patterns, into convenience, into pretending? Or do you stay awake, feeling everything, grieving what was, creating what could be? Because you now know something you can never unknow. Anxiety is not the problem. It's the prophecy. A prophecy that something within you refuses to be reduced, denied, silenced. And that something, that untamed, unbroken, unshakable self, has waited long enough. So what happens now? You live, not like before, not on autopilot, not in performance, but in presence. You live with your eyes open, your heart open, your nervous system attuned not to external validation, but to inner alignment. You walk through the world not armored, but rooted, not detached, but discerning, not above it all, but within it all, no longer afraid of your sensitivity, your truth, your feeling. You no longer ask, how do I get rid of this anxiety? You ask, what is it guiding me to become? And in that question, you find the beginning of a life no longer defined by fear, but by freedom. So the next time you feel it rising in your chest, the trembling, the tightness, the raw, inconvenient truth of your own aliveness, don't suppress it. Welcome it. Say to it, I hear you. I'm listening. Lead the way.